And this is our first topic today on our Rush Hour Roundtable. Let's introduce you to our panel. We have Capri Cafaro, the former minority leader of the Ohio State Senate and host of the Eat Your Heartland Out podcast and radio show. Next, Tony Katz, Indianapolis radio host of the Morning Rumble on 93 at WIBC. Angela Senadella, attorney and legal analyst and TikTok's premier legal voice. And finally, Amy Tarkanian, former Nevada Republican chairwoman and Republican strategist. Thank you so much for being here. And so, panel, across the nation, we've seen backlash against DAs who are perceived to be softer on crime. We saw it in San Francisco and now other cities like New York. Residents in these big cities seeing a spike in crime. They're calling for a crackdown. So do we get tougher on crime or do we focus on prevention? Let's start with you, Tony.
I don't think it's an either or. But when you see people upset with Governor Ron DeSantis claiming it's political, well, maybe it is political, and maybe there's something wrong with the political left's politics of not going after criminals, of not prosecuting. You think it's political. Tell that to the families of people who have been hurt, who have been stolen from, who have been killed. And they'll say, hell yes, it's political. Rightfully so. There's something wrong with the left's politics, whether it's Chase Bowden in San Francisco, George Gascon in Los Angeles, whether it's Kim Foxx in Chicago, Alvin Bragg in New York, or Ryan Mears right here in my beloved Indianapolis. They have the problem, and they only have one thing in common, and that's their political party.
And I do want to get first thoughts on this before we dig deeper. Capri, can we go over to you? Any response?
Sure. Well, I mean, to me, yes, I'm sure that we can make a partisan conversation about it, but I do agree with the fact that it's not an either or issue. I mean, what we're doing is we're focusing on the outcome. We're focusing on the correction side. We're not focusing on the underlying contributing factors to crime itself. I mean, there are a variety of types of crime. There are a variety of ways in which crime can be dealt with. And so to think that there is an obvious answer on how we deal with crime, I think, neglects how complex crime itself is. So, I mean, you have to deal with not just issues of mental health, not just issues of gun control, not just issues of law enforcement, but issues of poverty, issues of recidivism, issues of job readiness, issues of education, issues of substance abuse, of homelessness. These are systemic issues that, have to be dealt with at the policy level and community level before they can even be dealt with at the adjudicated level, dealing, from whether you're dealing with prosecutors or judges at the sentencing side. So before we get to the sentencing, we got a hell of a lot of other things we got to deal with to be able to curtail the crime problem that exists. And that takes a lot of work on behalf of people that are charged with making our laws before those laws are enforced.
Yeah, Angela, I see you nodding there.
So I agree with both Tony and Capri in that obviously it's not an either or answer, but this is important in that we live in a democracy. So the people of the city, the state, the country are supposed to be the ones who are deciding how you react to crime. And when Tony brought up DeSantis and how it's not political, maybe it's political, the real question here is, did the people of Hillsborough County vote Andrew Warren in? And the fact of the matter is they did. He's not a political appointee, in which case DeSantis could have done what he wanted to. No, he was voted by the people of Hillsborough. So he was voted to follow their will. And I agree strongly that he should then have the ability to follow that will.
Well, Amy, can I bring your voice in here? What do you think?
Sure. Well, I actually agree with Mayor Adams in the fact that there is a major problem. And when we are wanting to discuss eliminating cash bail, instead of maybe just making some changes, so then that way people actually feel the hurt and there's repercussions, or the fact that people want to remove, pretrial detention. How many people do you think are going to actually come back, and be seen in court? Probably not very many. So there are some issues that I do think need to be addressed politically.
Absolutely. And I mean, I want to bring in, Mayor Eric Adams of New York City says that its officers are doing their jobs, but the city's criminal justice system has created a revolving door for repeat offenders. Let's listen to that quickly.
Our criminal justice system is insane. It is dangerous, it is harmful, and it's destroying the fabric of our city.
Well, we just heard Mayor Adams saying the criminal justice system is, quote, insane. Tony, do you agree?
Well, it's insane only when we have prosecutors who don't prosecute. And Capri, with all due respect, that's the wrong conversation. Of course, it is political. And the only thing that connects the people that I just mentioned is their political party. That's not being a partisan. That's recognizing reality, staring you right in the face. It is not that you have to do one versus the other. It's not that you have to do one before the other. We can argue that we need to do all of these things at the same time. Prosecutors not prosecuting has failed. We should be honest about that.
Well, Tony, you're calling out Capri. Capri, would you like to respond to that?
Not really. I mean, sure. I definitely agree that it's not, we can deal with both at the same time. And I think that, we're dealing with a bunch of mixed metaphors here. So, for example, when we go back to the Hillsborough County individual, I think that it is important that we point out the fact that that is an individual who has been duly elected, which is totally a different situation than someone who is appointed and who is, either appointed by someone who can take that individual out of office or suspend them. And I think that the question here, I think that everyone has is, at what point do individuals that are prosecutors have the right not to enforce the law? I think that is the question that I think we have here is, at what point is it okay for prosecutors, whether they're elected or appointed, not to enforce the law? And why is that? Are they doing that because it's a partisan motivation? Or are they doing that, for example, because there's no capacity within the correction system, because there's no budget for, being able to incarcerate these individuals? So they have to put them back on the street because there's no place to actually house them at all.
I hear you,
So
Angela. Angela, why don't you jump in here?
Factor?
So what I need to jump in here is with a dose of reality, which is that prosecutors all across America exercise prosecutorial discretion. So when Tony says, oh, it's prosecutors not prosecuting, then we have to enforce the law. Like, that just doesn't happen. Prosecutors and
Of course it happens.
Well, I think we're more familiar. We're more familiar with judicial
he doesn't agree with him. You should not be punished just because you have a different political belief.
That's not the argument. Although you can argue, as you have, that if he was duly elected, maybe Ron DeSantis doesn't have this authority. That's a great conversation piece, and maybe he does have the authority. But you can't argue that the prosecutors are prosecuting when they're not. They're just not. In the people that I just mentioned, it's not a deniable subject. The people of Los Angeles and San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Indianapolis will all tell you the same. These are facts. They can't be denied.
Can I just quickly say, I do think that it's important.
Angela,
it's important to note that
I'm sorry, I'm going to give the floor to Angela for a quick response on that. Angela?
So those prosecutors then who are disagreed with will be recalled, or they will be not voted back in by the public. That's the way our system works. So clearly there is an experiment going on in certain cities in this country about how a prosecutor should prosecute. If the people don't like it, that will be recalled. So that's a system our democracy fixes. It should not be fixed by a governor who has a political agenda.
Well, and Tony, I do want to get back, and I hope you don't mind a slight pushback here, but bring it on, he says. Let's bring in, with the benefit of hindsight, what happened in the 90s when there was a similar desire to get tough on crime. We know, resulting famously in the 3 strikes law. I think we have a quote that we can bring up here. Studies out of the University of Minnesota and many others showed that the 3 strikes law did not work. And in some cases, it actually increased the rates of homicide. So do we get tougher? It's all very well and good to say we need to get tougher on this. Or is it truly a conversation that needs to be had about prevention first? Tony, what do you have to say about that?
Actual prosecution is not getting tougher. It's doing the job. Restorative justice might not be doing the job. The ideological connection between the people I mentioned isn't doing the job, and that connection with George Soros as well, as it was brought up. It's not working. I can't even believe we're arguing something that we know to be true.
Well, what is the path forward? And I do want to get a quick wrap up of thoughts on this. I know we could talk about this all day. It's a huge topic. Let's start with you, Amy. Final thought, 1 or 2 sentences. What is the path forward?
Well, I was just going to say that when you are the state's attorney, it's not your personal thoughts and ideas that should actually want you to do your job and to do it correctly. So Governor DeSantis actually said that he was negligent and incompetent by not following through. Plain and simple.
Angela, I know you have feelings on this. It's up to discretion, right?
Absolutely no prosecutor prosecutes all the law. They get to decide which laws that they're going to go stronger for and not. Overall, though, to reduce crime, more public education, stronger resources attributed to that.
Yeah, more of a public health approach. I hear you. Capri, what about you?
Yeah, well, let's not forget about judicial discretion as well. Judges always have the opportunity to decide on how much they sentence someone after they're guilty in the sentencing and penalty phase. I personally think that we do need to focus on the actual causes. We're talking about the symptoms and not the actual causes. We need to look at a comprehensive approach to tackle things like poverty, education, job readiness, alcohol and substance abuse, and then also funding law enforcement and the correction systems appropriately so we don't have recidivism.
Absolutely. Tony, final word goes to you.
I'm not arguing against education or against helping with substance abuse, or I'm not arguing against more mental health services. I am arguing the facts. These prosecutors aren't prosecuting. The people are disgusted. That's why crime has increased. There are cultural issues as well. But to deny this is stunning.
Tony, we appreciate it. Panel, we appreciate it. And don't go away. We have much more to get to.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.